As far as distributing classic games goes, the Nintendo Switch's online service is widely regarded as the worst thing in human history by literally every single person alive outside of the Nintendo boardroom. Because first of all, it took well over a year for the service to even come out, and once it finally did, it only offered a handful of 30-year-old NES games. And ever since then, they've been sprinkling new games in slower and more painfully than my neighbor Terry going #1 after visiting that massage parlor he likes going to all the time. Meanwhile, all the way back in 2006, the Wii's Virtual Console service offered games from the NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and even Nintendo 64 all on the first day. It felt like this is how Nintendo was going to distribute their classic games forever until the Switch came along and decided to switch things up. Sometimes you don't realize what you got till it's gone, I guess, but is the Virtual Console really the end-all be-all? Or is the Netflix-like subscription model actually better if you give it a chance and add more games? Well, let's give them both an honest chance. Obviously, right now, the online service sucks a big fat egg compared to the good old days, but it does have a lot of potential, while the Virtual Console had an astronomical flaw that nobody seems to talk about. And I'm talking about the fact that unlike iTunes and Xbox Live, you can't transfer past purchases up to new consoles. The Wii U kinda let you do it, but even then you had to pay $1, and I think that's kinda petty. I mean, I guess I can't transfer my physical Super Nintendo cartridges up to my 64 or GameCube, but I used to check what new games were put up on the Wii's Virtual Console first thing every Tuesday morning. And after it was all said and done, I ended up spending a decent amount of money downloading old games to the Wii because I naively assumed we'd be able to transfer them up with each generation. I mean, if I bought the Thong Song on the iPhone 1, then I could still re-download it to my current phone today. And I know it's a lot more complicated to transfer something like Mario Galaxy 2 from the Wii U to the Switch, but even my printer could probably run Wrecking Crew. So why it took so long to get this game Nintendo owns the rights to, I have no idea. So I just think it's kind of weird to have to repurchase games once they're available on whatever the current platform is. And what's even worse is that with every new console, Nintendo feels the need to start all over re-releasing their old games again. Again, if you get a new phone or tablet, you don't gotta wait for them to put all the old movies and music up one by one. And I know it's apples to oranges or whatever, but is it really that complicated to figure out how to put NES games on a console even back in 2017? It did make sense to sprinkle games out back on the Wii, because it'd make people waiting for Mario 3 and Super Metroid to try games they might have overlooked otherwise. But I'm pretty sure all 10 Wii U owners out there were among the 101 million people who bought a Wii. So given that a lot of people probably got their nostalgia fix on the Wii and the Classic Edition consoles, it's pretty unlikely the Virtual Console is ever going to be as big as it was. 2006 was the perfect time to capitalize on nostalgia from people who grew up with the NES, Super Nintendo, and 64. But in 2019, people mostly want GameCube and even Wii games, but Nintendo apparently doesn't know how to put those on the Switch. Which is kind of funny, seeing as how they don't seem to have a problem putting those on the 3DS. But if GameCube and Wii games were on the Switch though, then Nintendo wouldn't have any nostalgia left to sprinkle out in the next generation. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be clamoring for Wii U titles, because most people played those for the first time on the Switch anyway. But even though there's definitely a lot of kinks that need to be worked out, I think the subscription model would actually be more enticing in the long run for most people, since you can just play everything. The Virtual Console sales on the Wii U and 3DS probably died out because people realized their purchases would just be stuck on those devices. Nobody wanted to pay a convenience fee to transfer old games up to new platforms, and Nintendo probably feared that if they let people do it for free, then consumers would eventually have everything they wanted. With a subscription model though, Nintendo does have to give everything away, but by not letting people keep any of these games, they're always going to be forced to renew their subscriptions. The logic does make sense, but I don't think more than like 5 people are buying Nintendo's online service for NES games. People just want to play Switch games online like Mario Kart, Smash, Splatoon, Mario Maker, and a few others. And yeah, I guess NES games soften the blow of having to pay $20 a year for an online service that didn't see any improvements. But holding online play hostage and forcing us to rent classic games is never going to be as cool as the Virtual Console was. The Virtual Console's peak may have been on the Wii, but that doesn't prove the idea of selling old games is dead. It just means that people don't want to have to buy the same thing over and over again, and while there are benefits to the subscription model, there's no reason in the world not to have it both ways. I kinda like the idea of downloading a console with all the games stored in the app, because it makes playing retro 2-player games online possible without having to revamp them to the point where there's something completely different. It's just the original ROMs with glitches and all, and if Nintendo could just get rid of the lag, we'd be home free. Well, that and release 2-player games that are actually fun, but those are hard to come by on the NES, which is why we need more Nintendo consoles on the Switch. Aside from Street Fighter 2 on the Genesis of all things, Virtual Console games couldn't be played online, so the Switch's service actually has a huge advantage here. But rather than offering the original Mario Kart and older Smash games that people actually want to play with the subscription service, all we've gotten was the option to play a 30-year-old heavily outdated tennis game. River City Ransom's a pretty cool 2-player game, but it loses a lot of points when it can just be taken away at any time. And that's the biggest complaint I have with this service. I'm really not all that worried about getting games from other consoles, since I'm sure it's gonna happen at some point in the future. It's taking way longer than it should, but it's almost guaranteed to happen at some point. But even if Nintendo blew us all away and added games from every console they've ever made, certain third-party games are probably gonna disappear at some point. And call me crazy, but I think that's pretty lame. Games are taken away from the Virtual Console fairly often, but if you bought them while they were still available, then you could play them forever. It sucks that you can't transfer them up to newer consoles, but at least you can still play them on whatever device they're stuck on. But imagine being in the middle of playing Bebe's Kids on the Super Nintendo, then all of a sudden Nintendo takes it away from you because their deal ran plan up. I really like the idea of having access to all these games with a subscription, but does Nintendo really have to be so rude about not giving us an option to permanently buy them? The average person's probably never going to buy a game like City Connection, but if it's thrown in as a package deal, then everyone's probably going to check it out. And I'd even go a step further and say that a few people would probably end up loving it. But what good is making new fans for older games without giving anybody an option to actually buy them? I know movies come and go from Netflix all the time, but movies are different from video games. If somebody streams You've Got Mail and they decide they want to buy it, they're going to go out and buy it. But if somebody ends up loving Mighty Bomb Jack on the online service and then it just disappears, there's no way they could actually go out and buy it. Again, I like the idea of having an app for every retro console, but there's literally no reason not to give people the option to buy old games, especially when they're mainly subscribing to play modern games online. Why not give people without a subscription the option to download apps for different consoles and buy games within those apps? I mean, giving subscribers a discount actually might lead to a few more signups. If anything, it wouldn't lead to fewer subscriptions since those people are probably already playing Switch games online anyway. All I know is that making these changes would definitely make people stop missing the Virtual Console so much. Obviously, we'd have to be able to keep these games even after the Switch is dead, but if Nintendo let us transfer these purchases up to every console from this point forward, there'd never be the case to bring the Virtual Console back ever again. However, with the subscription service essentially being rentals, there's always going to be people talking about how good things used to be. And I think that's a real shame, because with the minor tweak of allowing permanent purchases, the service could be so much better. And it'd probably be a lot easier to get third parties to support the service too that way, since they can make money from sales on top of the royalties. But if we're going to compare the online service to the Virtual Console, Nintendo's got to give us some more platforms. I do see the appeal of sprinkling new games out so they don't overshadow each other, but when we're not even paying anything extra for new games anyway, then why not just put everything you've got up all at once? I'd bet my life for $1 that not one person out there who wasn't subscribed to the online service changed their mind when they saw volleyball was added. And I'm pretty sure Netflix would have never been a hit if they started off with 10 movies and added 2 to 3 every month. Nintendo probably thinks they're getting more value out of the retro library by doing this, but since no one's subscribing just to play these games, I actually think they're devaluing it. Some people think Nintendo's holding back on their classics to give indie games a chance, but while the absence of old Nintendo games probably did lead to more success for indie games, I really don't think the above-average sized N was smart enough to do this on purpose. Because if they really wanted to give good indie games a better chance of succeeding, then they wouldn't bury it next to all this trash on the eShop. If you ask me, indie games were the ones that helped Nintendo out by being there when there were no retro games available, not the other way around. And the fact that we had to wait a year and a half just to get 2 to 3 30-year-old games every month is disappointing though, especially since the Virtual Console had 2 to 3 new games every week. I get that GameCube games are a little more complex, but would putting a few Super Nintendo games up really bankrupt the company? Regardless of the dislike ratio for YouTube videos promoting new NES games, I'm sure Nintendo thinks they're doing just fine because they have 10 million paid subscribers. But again, people just want to play Switch games online more than anything else. I almost think Nintendo would have gotten less grief if they started charging for their online service without the NES games. Either way, people would still be asking for dedicated servers, but offering Super Nintendo and Game Boy games as part of the bonus would probably lead to fewer people feeling ripped off. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary, and I'd imagine N-Dog wants people to renew their subscription, so you'd think at least Super Nintendo games would be right around the corner, but then again, we're talking about Nintendo and the internet here, so don't expect too much. Honestly though, I do think $20 a year for Tetris 69 and a few dozen NES games is a fair bonus though. But when you look at the free games Xbox Live and the PSN offer every month, it's hard to stop bullies from giving Nintendo swirlies at school. I know Nintendo service is only a third the price, but unless online play for Switch games improves, I don't see people paying $10 extra for 2 Super Nintendo games every month, especially when they could just be taken away at any time. No matter how I slice it though, it's impossible for me to defend the Switch's online service over the Virtual Console. Sure, people would be more content if more consoles were offered and if they didn't make us wait 37 years for Earthbound Beginnings, but when games can be taken away from us without notice and no option to lock them down, I'm gonna have to keep crying myself to sleep every night wishing there was a way I could play Mario Kart Super Circuit with my best friend Wang who lives in Hong Kong, Connecticut. The subscription method's fine, and it's gonna be a lot better when more games are added, but it's a lot harder to justify when you know how easily it could have been so much better if Nintendo would just stop being Nintendo about it. But I'll tell you two people who have the best retro game services are today's patrons of the day, John Polish Impossible to Say and Hedge Knight Mike. If you want to be a badass like these two, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes and silly rewards. That way I could give paying child support the old college try. Or if you want to make cameos, then send us pictures or videos of you rocking anything from the merch store like these sexy BCC before you. What do you prefer though, Nintendo temporarily allowing us to play classic games for an annual fee? Or do you miss owning them forever on at least one console? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. But while you're here, make sure to share this video anywhere you think people are going to have something to say about it, and if you want to prove you're not a registered sex offender, then press the subscribe button if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.